So, I'm going to talk about a few little things that we think Bitcoin can do. We're going to talk about hoarding, equity, end of debt and credit as we know it, and all these terrible things that obviously cypherpunks would hate, like banks, because I don't hate them. I don't like central banks, and there's a big difference. I actually think banks are good. And Bitcoin does not replace banking at all. Contrary to what people think. It's a payment and cash system. It doesn't replace banking. It can do, in SegWit 1 or 2, less than 1% of a SWIFT system. Useless, in effect. As a full payment cash system, it's different. Banks allocate risk. Banks allocate capital. You don't get loans and you don't buy houses unless you save up with Bitcoin. And there are people who say you should save and all this stuff and we should go back 200 years. We're in a different society, we're a different world, and companies need to be able to get access to money and capital. So we're going to talk about some of these things. And we're going to talk about Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, and what it really means. It's first of all immutable. Now, that means we have a record that doesn't change. Anyone who's done a little bit of accounting or anything will know there are multiple ways of running your books. You can run your books where you can actually edit the records, and you can run them where you have a read-only record and you have to actually put in another entry to say that you screwed up and you have to fix it. Bitcoin's we have to fix it by putting another entry and actually leaving records of where it has been changed. And that's important in my opinion. The fact that you can go back and alter a record 5-10 years down the track has been the source of many, many frauds and problems throughout history. Enron being one, many changes. We look at the Madoff sort of Ponzi that we had. All of these things were not possible with Bitcoin. So that's a different view of the world. Where does it start? And this is the pervasive and infecting and corrupting cancer of an idea that has been around for many years. Mercantilism. This is old. This goes back, and this is why the Wealth of Nations was actually written, because of this idea. Adam Smith wasn't saying we need to be capitalist. He was saying mercantilism is bad. We need, the same as the French were saying, laissez-faire. We need freedom. We need open trade. We need the ability to be able to do, as a merchant, as a consumer, what we can do without someone telling us what the value of our money is. But governments love this because wealth is power. How much gold you have, how much of a treasure chest you have sitting there. That's what mercantilism is really about. This is the problem with things like gold standards, because getting this tangled up, people don't really understand what it's about. Mercantilism and gold is about power. That's what it's all about. It's not about opening up systems and allowing things. It's about how much bullion do we have? How much silver specie? And it's all about the state. Mercantilism started because the state started. There wasn't such a thing if we go back to the time of say the 11th century and the early Crusades or anything like this. There was banking, there were many things, there was a king, but there wasn't a state. It wasn't until the 15th and beyond centuries that we started creating states. And that's where we started national wealth, where we had to start actually hoarding to build ships so that we could capture more wealth, so that we could build more ships to capture more wealth. So, what is this? We have this thing called bullionism, economic nationalism. We have the idea that the more money we hoard, the more money, the more power we have. And the British were very, very good at this for a time. They basically did a lot of capturing after things, but the worst, if we go back, were the Spanish. The Spanish basically took the silver trade, pieces of eight, etc., and ripped apart Europe. And there's no other way to put it. As they ripped apart South America, they ripped apart Europe. And you know what the Spanish have out of that? They have a debt and a legacy now that is still with them, where they don't really work anymore. They believe they can sit there and wait and things will happen because we had money, we were powerful. That's the problem with bullion. That's the problem with hoarding. People start believing in the story rather than the idea of work. They start thinking that goods aren't as important as a lump of money. Not actually understanding what money is. Money is liquefied future goods. It is a call from what you've done now on society in the future. It is whatever's out there. If I have a certain money base and I have 1% of that, then I have, when I spend that money, 1% of the goods of society being created then. Not 1% later on, unless I spend it later on. I have the right to call at that point. That's what money's really about. So this is where the fallacy came in, where Adam Smith actually corrected things. Money is truly about what we're creating. It's the amount of goods and services, how productive we are, how efficient we are, what as a society we do to create more. Not what we think about leaving and losses and winners and losers and whatever else. Not a zero-sum game. I read The Economist a little while ago, and they were talking about trade losses between China and America. They were talking how the growth of China is going to take away from the US. That's bunk. The growth of China will not take away from the US. It will grow the pie. If I have more because I've created more, not because I've got a pile more money, but because I've made something, I take nothing from you. The problem and the fallacy that we love to teach everyone, especially the Occupy movement and things like this, is Africa and Asia, they're poor because we rape them and take their money and their country and their goods. World trade from Africa is less than 1% of anything created in the US. Africa is poor not because we take stuff from Africa, it's poor because we don't trade with Africa. Nothing happens. We don't deal with them. And we can't deal with them because the people can't deal with us. I spent time in Ghana and I spent time in India. And I saw people and they don't have money. They don't have goods. They don't have anything to be able to trade. That's the problem. And these are people who will wheel, deal, do anything to make money because they have families to support. Africa, it's a large country. It has massive opportunity potentially, except for one little problem. It doesn't produce anything. And we talk about the idea of moving into Africa and giving them solar panels. And I'll tell you right now, that's the most useless, stupid idea I've ever heard. Because you realise you can't build heavy factories with solar panels. I don't care. You cover the whole of Africa in solar panels. You don't make a car factory, ever. You cover the whole of Africa in solar panels. You don't get aluminium, ever. We're allowing people to be kept poor because we're not letting them trade. This is our problem. We have this guy here, Adam Smith. I'm sure most of you have heard of him. I've said it a few times. Back in 1776, 6 years after Australia got its first dumping of convicts, this guy up there in Scotland decided that, well, mercantilism's probably bad. In fact, we've got this non-zero-sum game. We have the idea that if we actually trade with people, we get more, not less. Not I have to beat you up and beggar my neighbour to do anything. But I can do a win-win scenario. It's not a zero-sum game. Trade is not about what I take. It's about what we give. Who's ever gone to a shop and tried to force someone to reduce their prices? Does it ever work? If they don't call the police? No. You deal with people because you interact and you deal with people as people. Not because you dictate what they have to do like government does, but because you interact as a human, as a person who wants to give. Not because you necessarily care what the butcher's family does or the baker's, but you interact and you're friendly and you're going to do things. And I should have turned that off. Yeah, what can I say? People calling me during these things. All right, so we have that, and this is what it was. It was why we had colonial expansion. It was the worst thing many people did. Do you know how much India made for Britain? Massive negative amounts. And Africa and everywhere else. The worst investment they ever did was this. Not what people think, not the great idea of making a beautiful world society. It didn't do any of it. It made a big hole in the budget and turned Britain from the world power to where it is now, a little socialist pauper that no one really cares about. So, what can we do? We have this thing called e-commerce, b-commerce, people to people, whatever else. Now, we have things that can be done right now. People can learn right now. Not everyone has to be a complete wanker like me and just stay in university for the rest of his life. Some of you will actually go out and actually experience the real world. Obviously, as you see, I don't. Just finished my last degree and I'm starting another one, so I'm weird that way. What can I say? Now, we have people who can go on things like Khan Academy and they can learn. We have degrees being offered online now and people can learn. People will learn how to code. People learn how to develop. And we don't have the same sort of having to step people up anymore because everything gets cheaper. It gets less expensive every day. That's the beauty of all this. Not because they have to be equal to the most luxurious computer out there or whatever else, but because they can access the internet and it's going to be cheaper over time. So, only so much wealth in the pie. That's the old fallacy. I'll try and teach you this one in Bitcoin world too, for some reason. The reality is we need to expand the pie. Dynamic, open economies. We want people everywhere to trade. And the reason they don't in many places is because they can't get bank accounts, is one. They can't actually access funds, is another. They can't get access to capital. Not the silly, I'm not going to do anything ICOs or anything like that, but small amounts of equity. Being able to do lighthouse projects like Mike Hearn, who lives in this country now, was proposing. Little things. I want to do something in my village. How about I raise $100? That's doable. That's growing a pie. So we don't want to actually go out there and beat the banks. Bitcoin isn't about beating the banks. It's about transforming. It is about evolving. There is no battle here. There is no fight. We're not doing the same thing. And over time, in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, we're not going to be in the same world we had before. It is going to be completely and utterly different. We don't want to have to play the same game. Banks are never going to be offering bank accounts to poor guys in Ghana. One of the things, I've talked about this one before, if people have listened, is I found incredibly cool, and people find this weird. When I went to places like the Philippines or Ghana, I would watch people build houses. They'd buy Besser bricks, they'd buy concrete, and they'd just build a little bit. And they'd build it sometimes over 20 years. And you can't sell a half-finished house, not for what it's really worth. You don't get your money back. It was a saving